This is quite a topical issue that we're going to be having a chat about now. It's the parking industry and driverless vehicles in Australia. A match made in heaven is the question. Would you please welcome up to the lectern Peter Damen. Peter, of course, is the chair of the Executive Committee for the Australian Driverless Vehicle Initiative, and he's in his own hometown, which makes a big change from what I've heard. He spends a lot of time travelling around Australia telling people about the Driverless Vehicle Initiative. Please make him very welcome.
Thanks, everybody. Great to be here, great pleasure to be with you. Tough gig after lunch always, so I'll try and make it interesting for you. Can I just ask here, we had a session yesterday that was really successful, yesterday morning, with the support of Parking Australia, a capital city forum for the Australian Driverless Vehicle Initiative. Can I just ask who in the audience here was at that yesterday? Right, so about 10 or 20%. So, all right, well, I'll try not to give the same content, so I'll try and make it interesting for you guys. Who here in the audience actually wants a driverless car? Put your hand up. All right, there's a few that doesn't. All right, so I've probably got a pretty sympathetic audience, so that's pretty good. All right. All right, well, so just to start, just give a very brief introduction for those that don't know who the Australian Driverless Vehicle Initiative is, but we've got a partnership of about 80 members. I'd just like to acknowledge the hosts of ADVI, the ARB group. I'd like to acknowledge Parking Australia, who have shown strong leadership to gather industry engagement around this topic of driverless vehicles and parking. And I'd like to clearly acknowledge, seeing that we're in Western Australia, the Western Australian Government, who are a partner of ours, and also our core partners, including Wilson Parking. ADVI is a collaborative of government, industry and academia working together to accelerate the safe and successful introduction of driverless vehicles into Australia for the benefit of the nation. And so why are we doing it? Well, there's a whole range of benefits. And the immediate one of those that we're working on is the road safety benefits. Road trauma costs the nation, at the moment, $27 billion every year. And of course, 90% of crashes or thereabout have human error as an element in why they occur. So if we can reduce a large proportion of those crashes, we have the ability to save a lot of road trauma and obviously enrich the lives of those people and their families that would otherwise suffer. But there's a whole range of other benefits, including social inclusion, including benefits for the environment and increased economic competitiveness and so forth for the nation, and we should be working towards that. And in fact, I'll go back. We only released a position paper last month on the economic benefits, and we identified that Australia could be generating about 100 billion or a little bit less in benefits per annum if we move fairly quick to adopt this new technology. So if I can just go off on a bit of a different direction for a minute to talk about the pace of change. And I just want to give you a flavour before we dive into driverless vehicles. So we're fast approaching the robotic revolution and the nano age. Okay, some of you may in the room know of Moore's law. I don't know who does, but Gordon Moore was one of the founders of the Intel Corporation, and he had a theorem that stated that computing processing power would double every 1 to 2 years. But recently, his theorem's been more widely applied to commentate on the pace of technology. And I think it's quite evident that the evolution of robots and automation will occur much more rapidly than, in fact, human evolution has occurred. And so the millions of years that have got us to the point where we have such an intelligent and capable audience No, you're not agreeing with that? We'll see robots in some areas evolve in mere decades. So let me give you a picture of how the transport environment might change in this context. So here's a picture from somewhere very cold, just to make you feel a bit warmer today. Who knows where this is? Have a think about it. You can shout it out if you want. No? Sweden? No, getting close. Close? No. It's actually Finland. And Finland is a small country like Australia, but they've been quite innovative. And at the moment, they're really disrupting the norm in terms of challenging urban transportation approaches. And they've been one of the first to adopt mobility as a service and basically anywhere mobility on demand. And I think we've talked a little bit about that over the last day already, but that's actually changing how we approach things. We're seeing certainly within a very open ecosystem, industries converge and a much stronger integration. And so in the future, we expect to see public transport, taxis, car sharing, ride sharing, bike sharing, and of course parking operated as a whole of service. And so the parking industry, and I think we've talked about it operating in silos in some areas, needs to get on the journey with that. And while Australian industry has been very good, I have to commentate about that because when we look to America and Canada and other places, even Europe, they haven't been as early to adopt the technologies and they're not as progressive, I would suggest, as Australia. I think Australia has an opportunity here to take advantage of some of this. And there's other areas, couldn't help but put a photo up of the beach, and you might want to be at Cottesloe Beach right now rather than here, but certainly as automation take hold over the next few decades, we expect that people will have a lot more leisure time, that our transport will revolve more around the leisure activity, and that in fact, as we have more leisure time, we have more time to innovate, and there will be more technological change, and it'll just be self-fulfilling, so we'll see as the norm continually challenged. So I'll give you a bit of a context. That was just a couple of examples, but as we move now into driverless vehicles, I think it's good to remember that change, the rapidity of that change is coming very fast. So when we talk about driverless vehicles or automated vehicles or autonomous vehicles or self-driving vehicles, I'll use those terms interchangeably, they're normally categorised in a range of different levels, and from zero automation all the way through to full automation where in fact we don't need a steering wheel or pedals or in fact anyone in the car. And at the moment we're at what's called partial automation, where you've got things like adaptive cruise control in your cars, some of you may have, things like stop-start assist in traffic. Some of the more progressive manufacturers like Tesla and Volvo have got these technologies on the showroom floor already, and more are coming out. And we're moving very fast to what's considered conditional automation, and we expect there'll be cars on the market by the end of this decade. Obviously, ADVI, the Australian Driverless Vehicle Initiative, is very fortunate that we have a dialogue internationally and we're able to get behind closed doors that others can't get to. And so we're fully aware of what's available in the technology space right now, and it's coming quite quickly. But in any case, conditional automation is where the vehicle undertakes all functions of driving, but the human operator, the driver, still needs to supervise and to be able to take control if there's an issue, if the vehicle can't navigate a particular problem, the human is still in charge. And so that's the next phase, coming very, very quickly. We're then moving to where basically the the human driver, the person in the car, has to have no supervisory role, and that's level 4. We expect that those vehicles, and all the predictions at the moment coming out of the US, Europe, even Australia, are suggesting that those vehicles will be on the market within the decade. Okay, so we're not too far away, and we need to start prepping for it now, because the infrastructure timeline is much longer than that, and changing the way we have our cities laid out and the way our infrastructure is managed needs to accommodate that in the future. So we're talking about fairly short timeframes. Here's another slide which gives an example from Transurban, one of our core partners. They just released this in the last month from a study that they did. And the point being made here is that in the near future, within the next decade, we'll be getting these more automated vehicles on our roads, but we will have a large mix. So at the same time we have highly automated vehicles, we'll have vehicles that are partially automated, conditionally automated and so forth. And that period, that transition period will be the toughest, because we need to manage quite a diverse range of operating environments, and in fact the human drivers are going to be the most challenging, because they're the ones with the poorer eyesight and the slower reaction times and all the things that go with being you and I. So that's a challenging period, and we're certainly initiating a lot of work here in Australia that's relevant to Australia to see how we might adopt this technology in a safe manner. It's generally recognised that, so we'll have basically 3 eras. The first era is where we are right now. This is where we're exploring the technology, piloting, testing it, before its wide adoption. In the second era, basically consumers will begin to adopt these automated vehicles much more routinely, and they'll become more ubiquitous. And finally we move to the third era, and that's where they become the primary means of transport. And we expect that's going to take some time still. People will still want to own their vehicles for a while, but they may be interested to give up their second car if ride sharing is available or car sharing is available. But within this third era, billions of square metres of parking will no longer be needed. We've recently done some national surveys, and it revealed a whole bunch of interesting information, but we recognise that people have a whole range of concerns, and we need to work through these. You know, it's not just going to be an easy transition. And the number one thing that people are concerned about is that they're concerned about their legal and financial obligations if the car crashes. Fortunately, there's been a fair bit of work already done by government on this. National Transport Commission released a report just recently, and in fact a number of the manufacturers have come out and openly stated that when the vehicle's operating in fully autonomous mode, that they will be fully liable. Okay, so I think that one's manageable. It's something that we're already addressing. Yesterday there was a comment came up about children and grandchildren. I think that's a harder one, allowing your child or grandchild go in an autonomous vehicle by themselves. And I think that's something a bit further off, and we'll certainly be looking to implement less sophisticated scenarios in the first instance, so people will be driving their autonomous vehicles on freeway systems and limited use scenarios of that type. Of course, what people don't always want to be handing over control to their vehicle, and the manufacturers are smart enough to understand that consumers pay their bills and they need to provide choice. But people do agree that they don't want to be driving the car all the time. So certainly to begin with, at least, this is a sort of task that people would be comfortable for automated vehicles to take over from them. And the number one on the bottom of the list there, as you can see, is they're quite happy for cars to park themselves. And this is why automated valet parking will become readily available very soon. We're aware of a number of solutions coming to the market in the next few years, and the parking industry needs to be ready for that. So I mentioned before there's There's a range of different possible futures. I've put 4 up here on the screen. There's others, I'm sure, but these are some extremes. And basically we move from everyone owning autonomous vehicles all the way through to, on scenario 4 on the screen there, where a large portion of our fleet is shared and we've got car sharing and self-driving taxis. And under that scenario, if we were to move that far, the modelling done, and this modelling's come out of Europe, suggests that up to 60% of the parking would no longer be needed. Of course, that is the most efficient scenario as well in terms of the cost of travel. I don't know if you can see from the bottom of the screen there, but the relativities relative to now, it'd be about a third of the cost of travel to what we have right now. So what does it mean for parking? Well, of course, with autonomous vehicles, the question is whether we'll have a reduced demand for parking. Again, that depends on the ownership model and the amount of ride sharing and how far the ride sharing economy progresses. But certainly we will need less space for parking. As you'd be aware, with a valet parked autonomous vehicle, you don't need to open the doors, you don't need to have stairwells, you don't need pedestrian walkways, you don't need two-way aisles, you don't need a whole bunch of things in that area that's operating autonomously that you do now. It stops being a pedestrian space, it starts becoming a vehicle space, with the exception of those areas where you have drop-off and pick-up. It's a bit hard to see this one, but here's an example of how we might plan for our parking facilities of the future. And here's an example where the suggestion is it's retrofitted, and in fact you can see from this example where the top floor has been repurposed for other uses. In this case it's got some trees and so forth on the top floor, but it could be used for other purposes. You can see there the stacking in the intermediate levels where we don't need the same level of space between the vehicles that we have now. And this is going to be challenging because a lot of the infrastructure we have now, it's got lives of 40 to 50 years in some cases, and the columns are in the wrong places, you know, the stairwells are there and all this sort of thing. So in the future we'll need to build multi-storey car parks with increased floor-to-floor heights to accommodate those future uses, and we'll need to allow for the automated vehicles to be stacked more closely together on the one level, as shown here, with no requirement for pedestrian access other than people to service, obviously, those areas. And we'll need, as shown on the bottom here, retrieval zones and drop-off areas where people can operate the vehicles using voice commands or smartphones and the like. So here's a slide which shows the situation of today, right? This is an example of how much space parking currently takes up, and the solid red blobs are parking structures and the red outlines are at-grade facilities. And you can see that parking takes up an enormous amount of space, represents a fair amount of our CBD floor space as well. And of course, this doesn't even show the on-street parking, which one of the previous speakers mentioned, could be equally as much again. And this particularly in places like Perth and Sydney is an issue because large areas of space in our cities is taken up by parking. So our city planners and architects need to be inspired to think a bit different. Here in Perth there's a 2050 plan that's just come out. In other cities there's something similar, and it's important that we work to change the thinking around these plans so it's just not propagating existing trends but thinking about what the future might actually be. Christina before mentioned about repurposing, and I agree with her that repurposing parking facilities is not easy. In fact, they don't have plumbing, they don't have charging stations in many instances. They don't have a lot of services required for other facilities, and it's generally not even cost effective to retrofit those. But in some instances you can. Here's an example of a multi-storey car park that's been repurposed as a luxury apartment building. It's possible, and in some instances we may want to do that. Christina gave a couple of other examples, but I say if there's one point that I'd like you to take away, is not about repurposing, but it's about getting it right now. Right? We're only just starting to adopt these new technologies into our fleet. Now is the time to get the designs right. Now is the time to start thinking about that. Now I understand our parking operators work on much shorter time frames than what I talked about because they're putting in boom gates and meters and so forth and technology that has shorter time frames. But our infrastructure owners are the ones that are, I think, going to be in a bit of a problem state here at the moment because things are going to change very rapidly for them. So we need to start be thinking, because I know that people are building car parks right now that are the same as before, and we need to think about doing it differently. So how prepared is the parking industry? Well, it's a good question. I'd just as be happy to ask you guys, but as I said before, I think the Australian parking industry is better placed than some other parts of the world. You've been early adopters of technology. I think there's a need, as I said before, about further integration, and I think that'll be important as we move forward. But ultimately, there's a number of things that we would suggest that the parking industry needs to do, and I'm just trying to find it now. The Australian Driverless Vehicle Initiative has come out with a parking position paper in the last few weeks, and it makes recommendations, and if I could just read those, and I'm happy to take your views on that. But the first is that we recommend that the parking industry expands its scope of business to include all aspects of automated vehicle technologies and data requirements, including holistic solutions for connectivity, security, privacy, data processing management, and analytics. We recommend that the park industry restructure the aftermarket business models to address new retail competition that may spawn from driverless vehicle opportunities and deployments. We're recommending that the designs of parking structures and parking facilities incorporate designated parking areas in the first instance and floors with facilities dedicated to self-park technology. And we're talking here in the next 2 to 3 years, not 20 years. We recommend that the industry evaluate investment opportunities to support the adoption of highly and fully automated vehicles and establish a presence in these industries, that it collaborate with vehicle manufacturers and technology providers to guide the development of the new autonomous vehicle fleets and commuter services that deliver value add and business growth opportunities within the whole ecosystem. And we recommend that the industry partner with integrated mobility providers to incorporate parking industry offerings within that ecosystem. So I think that I'm very pleased that the parking industry has incorporated in this conference a fair bit of dialogue around this topic. As I said, it's coming very fast. I think you're starting to listen. I think you've been listening for a while. I think it requires some champions here in the room to work with us to achieve this change, to encourage politicians, to encourage the government to change its thinking, because often it's the government that's actually the owners of the infrastructure. Of course, as this new technology comes available, the pricing arrangements on our networks, the way of actually generating income, particularly as we get more electric vehicles, will change, and that'll put pressure on the existing government frameworks. So we need to look at doing that, and we need to look at doing that together, industry and government. Ultimately, this might be one possibility. I don't know who can see themselves using their car as a mobile office and home, but this guy looks pretty happy, yeah? I'm not sure it's my cup of tea, but anyway, I can imagine myself, in any case, getting in the back of the car, going to sleep, setting it to auto cruise control all the way to Coral Bay, and then getting out and go fishing. So there's plenty of benefits immediately apparent. course, as I mentioned, we've produced a parking position paper, and we'd like the industry's involvement in that. Parking Australia is helping to facilitate that, and of course I'm happy to take comments at any time or questions today. Hopefully we've got a bit of time. I don't know if it's working. Yeah. There's very little, I'd have to say, and within our position paper we've certainly highlighted there's a need to get the guidance documents in order. I mean, the Australian standards are out of date. They've got no mention of any of this. You know, they're not allowing for that, although they are minimum standards. Obviously you can do better than that. Some of the government's guidance, like Austroads, that's coming out at the moment, is starting to prepare for it, but I think there's got to be some more work done around that to help, so it's not everyone reinventing the wheel every single time, that we can do it as an industry. Yep.
Again at 5 o'clock to come and pick me up. So requiring no parking, and in the meantime I could probably activate it to go and pick the kids up from school, bring the kids home. Is that part of the dream or part of the vision, or am I misguided?
We're not sort of at the moment getting down to that level of detail in terms of the vision. I think that presents some problems as well, because that could potentially add to the congestion levels on our road network. At the moment, the predictions are, certainly while car ownership remains the norm, that as we get autonomous vehicles, the level of congestion will increase, certainly for the next 5 to 10 years. So, you know, I think we need to be prepared for that, and it's only as people move away from car ownership to more car sharing. Some of the scenarios you talked about may aid that, like multiple use of the single vehicle, that potentially we can reduce the congestion levels. So that's one of the things government's got to work very hard on. You still need parking, of course, at your home under that scenario, and one of the wins, of course, is if you don't park your car at home, you can turn your garage into something else. And think of putting, I don't know if you want to put a home gym or something in your garage, but you know, you can certainly repurpose even some of the current parking areas in residential, and in future we may not need to build garages with our residential facilities. So there's another win. But I think the jury's still out about you know, how this is going to evolve over the next couple of years in terms of our city planning, and we just need to work to get that right. Yep. Christina? I'd have to say they've probably not made much movement at this stage. I think that, look, it was interesting, there was an international survey done about 12, 18 months ago, and it revealed that Australians didn't know much about this at the time. It's part of the reasons why we started the initiative. And that survey indicated Australians knew the least about driverless vehicles relative to America, the UK, China and so forth, but was more willing to adopt it and more willing to pay more for it. So, you know, that suggests, you know, we've got an appetite for it. But in saying that, government also was not very aware of this. Certainly the politicians weren't. I think over the last 12 months we've changed that quite a bit. But government was certainly, at the time, a bit wrong-footed. They need to move it forward. They've certainly responded quite well, and they're starting to think about this further. We've got the first project underway in Victoria right now to look at certifying the first road in Australia for autonomous vehicles, so that any autonomous vehicles that meets the requirements will be legally allowed to operate on that road, and I think that'll then progress to other states. So we're starting on the journey of setting those standards. In terms of the Australian standards, I don't think there's been any movement there, and I think the industry should certainly have a voice to try to change that.
Yeah, I had a question that related to the one just prior.
Sure.
There's a lot of crystal balling about the potential implications for driverless vehicles, and you listed a number of those. The one that perhaps piques the interest of this audience the most was what you describe as a quite extreme reduction in parking demand and essentially redundancy of existing parking infrastructure. It seems to me that that's certainly is a high, has a lot of potential, but it's, as with the other potential outcomes, it's heavily dependent on what happens on other innovations, technological or commercial or whatever. And do you agree that the match made in heaven might be driverless cars with the advance of the sharing economy? Because while ever people retain their expectation that they can hop in their own car, drive to their destination and be conveniently get back into their own car to return or to go somewhere else, while people have that affection for their own vehicle, then a driverless car is still going to need to be parked. But you combine driverless vehicles and their enablement of sharing so that a car can take one use and then quickly go on to the next and the next and the next and still be back to pick you up at 6 p.m. if that's what you want, then that's when the impact gets really magnified.
Sure, yeah. Look, I think my prediction is the scenario will somewhere be in the middle for the near future at least. To get to the extreme is going to be very challenging in the next 10 years or 20 years for that matter. But ultimately that's where the greatest benefits are generated, and where the match made in heaven is for the parking industry to come on that journey through that period and adjust what it does so they can actually still generate the same opportunities for itself, the same revenues and so forth, provide new opportunities. What we know is that the value in this space is going to move from the hardware to the software. So all the value is not going to be in cars anymore, but it's going to be in the downloads, it's going to be in the data, it's going to be in a range of different softer technologies, just like you see with your mobile phone. I mean, Nokia went bust because they didn't sell any apps, and even though they had 75% of the mobile phone market. So I think we'll see the same with the auto manufacturers. They're starting to converge with the companies like Google and Apple, and I think the parking industry needs to get in there and start thinking about what it might offer within its parking facilities in these different areas than what it's traditionally done. So in that space, it doesn't have to lose all of its revenue streams. I think there's new sources of revenue there that it can take advantage of. Well, certainly we'd like to see, for the societal benefits, people sharing cars more. We'd like to see more people in autonomous vehicles, because autonomous vehicles are safer than human-driven vehicles and so forth. Yeah.
Peter, that we'll have to leave it there. Unfortunately, it's 3:20. If you've got any other questions for Peter, you could perhaps put them onto the app that we got you to download, address them to Peter, and then maybe we can do it round table that way, and everyone can see the questions and the answers, which I think might work out well. Would you put your hands together, please, ladies and gentlemen, for Peter Damen, sharing some information with us today.